Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 5 Tips and Tricks for Careers in Athletics. I am your host, Dr. Maury Mosovitz, with my favorite co-host, Jen Albanese. Hey, Jen.
Hello, Maury. How are you today?
Good. It's very interesting that you're throwing in that what I think is trying to be a British accent. I don't know if it's not
terrible.
Really good at all.
It's just absolutely terrible.
It must be like that.
Strong suit.
You mean accents aren't like what you go around doing all the time?
We already talked about my special talent.
Yeah, we know that
accents,
it's not
okay?
accents. So it's interesting that you're going the route of British, because I feel like I've been inundated by Harry Potter today. My wife had wands out in our house and they were watching it.
What's wrong with that? There's nothing better than Harry Potter.
It has overtaken the Mosovitz household.
Wait, you had wands out? Why'd you have wands? Like
because she's doing stuff in class, and then also our children has got into it. So I walk in and there's it's like, why are there magic wands all over my house right now?
That's amazing.
It's very interesting. I laugh though, because you and I have a funny backstory to Harry Potter, because
we have a funny backstory about everything.
But
especially.
But you didn't read the books, right?
No, I did not read the books.
So I read all the books before they came out on movies, because that's how old I am. And so
I'm old, but I didn't read the books either.
I know. Okay. I really liked the books, and I was not a reader as a child. They were one of the only things I liked. But we were watching, what was it, the last movie, right?
So it was I kind of jumped on the Harry Potter train a little bit later than most people. So I started watching it when my husband and I started dating, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, more like 8.
Well, you have been married that long,
We've been
so
married
it's been
7 years, so it's probably 8 or 9. And we were talking about it because he obviously watched all the movies, went to the theater with his mom, and saw all the movies, and I never got into it. So I was like, oh, okay, I'll try. So I start watching the movies and
get hooked,
obsessed. Oh my God. But I never looked online. I never wanted to see what the ending was.
Yeah.
So in my mind, I'm like, how is this going to end? What's going to happen? And so I think we were talking about it one day, and you just so nonchalantly.
I don't think I did it that way.
Yes,
I think it was.
Did.
Yeah.
You did. Go ahead. Tell
No, you do it. You say it.
You were like, well, he dies in the end. And I was like, what? Sorry, spoiler if no one's ever seen Harry Potter. I was like, he dies? And you're like, yeah, he dies at the end.
I kind of remembered as more of have you seen, I feel like I was egging you on, have you seen it yet? Have you seen the ending yet?
Were. Yeah.
And then you're like, what, does he die? And I was like, I don't know. And you were like, he died. That's the way I remember it. I don't remember it as me coming out and being because I don't think I would have straight out said he dies, because it wasn't true. So I feel like you were so nervous about a plot line that you created me telling you that he died. But I don't think I did.
I think I was halfway through, and I was I don't want to watch the rest of these knowing that he's going to die in the end. It's going to be terrible. It's going to be
you kept looking at me and being like, you got to tell me this. I'm like, I can't tell you. I'm going to ruin it for you. I feel that went on for a couple weeks.
I know. And then I was like, okay, I have to watch the end, because I didn't want, and obviously if you've seen the movies, he doesn't die.
If you want to go into the real lore, though, he kind of does die and comes back.
Right, but there's part of his body that dies.
Yeah.
That creepy little whatever that thing is. Which also, if you ever get the chance to go to London, we went to the actual sound stages where they filmed it, and they had that little animatronic
creepy thing.
And it was still creepy. It was creepy in person. It was so weird. But yeah, it's so great. Harry Potter's just the best.
I will definitely say it was a good part. I enjoyed it in my childhood. I remember reading the book, so it's definitely worth it.
I feel like it's something that stands the test of time.
Absolutely.
Our kids could watch it when they get older and be like, this is still such an incredible.
Yeah, because it's not grounded in reality. There's no time frame that this sits in. Your magic wand doesn't outdate itself.
Listen, your magic wand could work when you go to Universal Studios.
There you go. Okay. Pitch for Universal. Well, on that note, as we advertise for everybody else, let's get into our commercial, and we'll see everybody when we get back.
Harry Potter.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please follow us on your favorite podcast streaming service. The 5 Tips and Tricks podcast is a part of Athletic Career Consulting, a group focused on educating and guiding high school and college students looking towards careers in athletics. To find out more, go to our website at www.athcareer.com. That's ATHCAREER.
Welcome back. And we have a great guest today. Maury, let's do an introduction.
Very exciting. Today's podcast guest has a bachelor's and master's degree in architecture from Tulane University and studied at the Architectural Association in London. He made a name for himself through developing a reputation in programming, planning, and design of sports, recreation, and student life facilities throughout the Northeast. In 2004, he founded Sgarzi Associates, which was later acquired in 2011 by worldwide architecture firm Sasaki. Upon joining Sasaki, he became a senior principal overseeing Sasaki's sports and recreation division. During his time at Sasaki, he has worked on multiple master plans, including Cal Berkeley, University of Texas, and Syracuse, as well as construction projects, including Boston College Hoag Pavilion, RPI's Houston Fieldhouse Multipurpose Arena, and Loyola, Maryland's Ridley Athletic Complex. Happy to welcome to the podcast, Chris Sgarzi. Welcome, Chris.
Hi,
Thank
Chris.
you. Glad to be here.
Thank you for doing this. We're really excited to have you.
Sure, it's a great idea what you have here. I'm looking forward to looking at some of your other podcasts that you've done.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. We've got to have a lot of interesting people. So a lot of people might not think necessarily of athletics and think about architecture, but you really have thrived in the world of combining those two. What do you think? How did you decide that that's something you wanted to get into?
Athletics was always a part of my life. My father was actually a Division I football official. And so I went to a lot of campuses when I was younger. I went to an Orange Bowl.
Wow.
And so athletics was always something I was interested in. But then when I became an architect, at first I didn't put the two together, but eventually I realized that there is sort of a niche area of sport design. And so combining things of my interest was really a home run for me.
Yeah, I think so many people don't realize the variety of things that relate to sports and architecture. I've learned by working with people like you and other people, it's such a big part of the world of sports, like how it affects what you do on a day-to-day basis, how it allows you to operate. I don't think people always realize all the detail that goes into what people like you do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's and you hear more. I mean, we're always hearing about that sort of arms race and the importance of facilities, the amount of money that goes into it. So it is important that you get it right and that you understand your audience and who it's for.
Yeah. Well, let's get started. First tip.
I was thinking about this idea of tips, and it's probably a little different in my industry. But one thing that, and I touched upon this a little bit already, is that one thing I appreciate about doing design and sport is the passion that people that are in athletics like yourselves have for what they do. And so I think you really need to capture when you're designing something the differentiators of each campus and why people are there and what their passion is for their program. So when you're trying to develop a facility for whatever campus it is, whether it's Division I or Division III, I always try to find what is special about that place. And those become the differentiators because you're not going to try to out-facility everyone else. Like you're not going to out-facility, say, Alabama or Clemson or Texas, but you can take advantage of what is special about your campus and the culture at your campus. So I think, for me, that's something that attracts me to the profession and attracts me to wanting to go to different campuses and learn those differences.
So you're not really excited if someone looks and goes, that's a building that Chris did, because you don't want every building to be a cookie cutter. Well, I did that. For you, it's about capturing the culture.
That's absolutely right. I think a building should look like it belongs where it is.
Yeah.
And so that is a lot about capturing the essence of that campus. Doesn't mean it has to look old if the buildings are old, but it just has to work.
Right.
It has to be unique to stand out so that that it's a part of that community too. I love that you said that you want to find the passion and what's special about the place, because you don't think about that when you think about building a building. It's got to be the biggest building. It's got to be the most high tech building. It's got to be the most impressive. So you're impressing all of these people, but to capture the special and the passion and the uniqueness of a place is really important, because that makes it feel like it's a part of the community. So that's really cool.
There's nothing better than the ribbon cutting day.
Yeah.
And when the student athletes see it for the first time, and the look on their faces, and I think whenever you can deliver a project and do so by exceeding the expectations, that's a win. Everybody's focusing on what's in it and getting it right and making sure it functions properly. But if the design can elevate to another level and people get in there and they're like, oh wow, this is fantastic, that's a game changer.
Do you think that campuses that focus where they have kind of a more strict idea of what happens with their campus, like, and not anything against it, but I think about like Notre Dame, very
Absolutely.
much like this is the way that they do it. These are the materials they use. Do you think that that's a positive or a negative for a campus?
Well, I do like having some restriction or some guidelines to work from. But it's interesting you should bring up Notre Dame, because I just finished a project at Boston College.
Yeah.
And, it's very similar. And you look at their science building and even their rec center that they recently did, and they look fairly similar, even though they're very different building types. But we just finished the basketball practice facility there as an addition to Conti Forum, and it's all glass.
Right.
Wow.
It's really unlike anything else on the campus, but people now love it.
Right.
And so
it's
unique, and it's at an entrance to the arena. So it brings a different kind of excitement when there's an event. So I think it works, and I think they like it, but it's not what was expected in the beginning.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
That's very cool.
This has been super interesting. So let's hit number 2.
Okay. So my second thought is really about knowing your target audience. And a lot of the improvements you're seeing on campuses and athletics are about recruiting. I mean, let's face it, you have to be attractive to the student athlete, because it's super competitive. So it's important to know your audience. When they show up on campus or recruit, a lot of times they may only be 16 years old, as you know, right? And they're with their parents usually, right? So what are they looking for? So each person that is looking at the facility is looking for something a little different. The parent is essentially looking for, is my child going to be taken care of and going to be able to grow here, and have a successful outcome in the end? Whereas the student themselves might be saying, are we going to get better? Am I going to get better? Does the university support this program? Am I going to feel like I'm getting the support of the university? And then you also have the coaches. So, coaches are looking at a pretty quick result. Can they win?
Right.
Do they see success here where it's going to be about, I'm going to be able to recruit good athletes. I have the facilities to be able to develop those athletes, and I'm going to have a chance to win. So, I think it's important to look at all those perspectives, and realize that the recruiting starts now with that 16-year-old, but what's happening today is you're re-recruiting your athlete. You're trying to retain your athletes now, and not have them leave.
Right.
So there's a lot of different constituents to consider, and so it's important to understand those different perspectives.
I think it's so interesting about the whole change in way how you have to think about retaining, because I know definitely have conversations about what does it mean to get someone in the door, but then someone who's 16 to somebody who's 20 might have a different need for sure.
Yeah.
Being in a facility, rehabilitation and, being comfortable in the facility might be much more important to them than all of the fun and exciting things. And I know that dialogue has changed a lot. Like when I'm talking with people over the last couple of years, especially with the transfer portal being opened up. So it's kind of crazy how your industry, and I really didn't think about it as much until you just said it, has to be keyed into that and bring it to your clients, because they might
Yeah.
not be aware of what's actually going on around them.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, it's very competitive. There's a lot of visiting going on. Athletes visit other places naturally because they're competing
Mhm.
Right.
against each other and they're traveling, so they're more aware. And it's all on social media also.
Yeah.
And I think it's always interesting that we have the conversation about, like, well, what were our donors like? And there's always these, like, I think, kind of recognition pieces that, everyone wants to make sure that people are comfortable with. But I find fascinating that the recruiting pieces end up being what draw the donors the most, and no one ever, like, realizes it, but they're the ones that end up
Yeah.
being almost as fascinated or more fascinated with the kids, the people that are contributing. Like, those are the things they talk to me about more than, like, the health and wellness pieces, or they
Yeah.
love the
Yeah.
kind of fun, exciting pieces that, we usually think is more geared towards the recruit. And then all of a sudden you have this crazy, experience, and you had a gentleman that's a CEO of this big company, and he's in there doing it. So,
I think of the slide at Clemson where they always show that on TV, where they like the student athletes go down
Yeah.
the slide, and I'm like you're right, that the donors rather go down the slide than go walk through the eating area that
Yeah.
you just spent all this time on, what kind of chairs they're gonna sit in, and it's like,
Yeah.
can I go on the slide? Like, that's all I think about. It's like that flashy for the 16-year-old is what you're
Yeah.
trying to get, but
Yeah.
I always think about the
And
slide.
we can't forget the donors, obviously,
Yeah.
because
They make it happen.
they make it happen. And at this point, and from what one of the things I've seen evolve is that athletics projects need to be, on most campuses, 100% supported by
Yeah.
donors and not by the universities. There are some exceptions out there, but
Yeah.
generally, these need to be donor supported. So they have to see a reason and they have to be motivated.
Yeah. That's great. Okay, number 3.
So number 3 is kind of related to the direction we were headed, which is about benchmarking. It is important to know what else is out there. And so we do a lot of benchmarking. We look at the competitors when we start with a university or college. We ask them who are their competitors. I mean, the conference competitors,
Yeah.
but they're recruiting against perhaps universities that are not in their conference, because of the student profile or the geography or
Yep.
some other reason. So it's important to understand what else is out there. So we do a pretty detailed exercise of benchmark comparisons, because again, the coaches and student athletes might know these places, and the story might need to be convinced to an administrator.
Right.
And so you might have to be explaining the justification for this need. Why do we need another basketball practice gym? Well,
Right.
look at everyone has this.
Mhm.
We have to have it. They need to use it 24 hours a day.
What is it ever a situation of, like, in design where it's something that's solely different for the culture of that organization, and the benchmarking kind of goes against, and not against it, but how you have to look at the benchmark says, that's not really the way that this organization works, so we might
Yeah.
need to do, and that's different from saying, okay, we need a
Yeah.
practice facility when you do planning. But when you're in the actual design of a building, how do you separate out trying to follow your peers compared to create your own way that works for that organization?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think benchmarking is just another data point,
Yeah.
and it's how you use it and what it tells you. Because everybody doesn't have the same practice gym.
Right.
They're different configurations, but they give you ideas. And so I think they're used in some cases just to justify the idea.
Right.
In other cases to look at options for layouts and how they're designed, and what's next to them and the relationships to other spaces and where they are on campus. But in the end, it goes back to the point I was making earlier that the solution has to be for that university and
Yeah.
that particular department and that
Mhm.
particular program.
Yeah, because we've been in meetings where people talk about and say, hey, well, they have this here and this is the way they do it here, and it keeps coming back and back, and then you have to kind of work through that. Well, it's great that it's there, but does that fit for us? And does that
Right.
fit for what we're trying to accomplish? And, maybe there's another way to accomplish that same goal,
Yeah.
that works within what we've got going on. And I think that's one of the bigger challenges is to, how do you make it work for you? And like, how do you look at what other people are doing, understand why it's making them successful, but then pulling those things out to say, okay, that this is how it's going to work here, has got to be one of the bigger challenges.
Yeah. The Boston College example, I don't mean to harp on that one,
No,
but
it's a good
it's
example.
current.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because they started out saying we have to have 2 gyms,
Yeah.
one for men and one for women, and we want, a whole new building. And we looked for sites, and there really weren't great sites, and the
Yeah,
cost was getting pretty high.
That's a huge challenge for them. They don't have a lot of land.
Exactly. In the end, what they did was they said, okay, they were sharing a gym with volleyball.
Yeah.
So they took volleyball out. They made it dedicated to men's and women's basketball. So they took the bleachers out and just made it a complete transformation and added other things. And in the end, what they really liked about it was that it was in the core of the campus and it was attached to their arena.
Yeah.
So the location was ideal.
Yeah.
By opening it up with glass, now you've transformed it completely.
Yep.
And I met with the women's basketball coach just a couple weeks ago, and I said, "How's it going?" And she said, "You cannot enter this gym without smiling."
Yeah.
Because the daylight that
That's
comes
awesome.
rushing in and the
Yeah.
views are so special, and you're right in the middle of campus. Now, you wouldn't have gotten that if the building were off more remote.
Yeah.
And so, there's a compromise here or there, but in the end, they think they nailed it.
And being in a cold climate that can often be a little overcast, to have buildings that bring in sunlight in the middle of winter when you're in the heat of your season is not the worst thing to have.
Yeah, we know all about that.
You know all about that. Yeah.
Not the worst thing
there. That's for sure something we face. So
having some glass and bringing in some sunlight is not the worst thing that could happen.
Yeah.
No.
I was concerned in the beginning that it was going to be too much glass.
Yeah.
And that it was going to feel very different than the arena that they play in.
Yeah.
But it's not at all the problem. I mean, they love the transparency. They're not worried about the depth perception or anything that the glass does behind the backboard. We can protect against the sun, so there's no solar gain. But I think it's the quality of the space that is a differentiator.
Yeah.
That's so great. That's awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Tip number 4.
So number 4 is also recognizing that you're doing buildings for a university that's there for a long time. And, when you do campus buildings, you really need to be thinking about 50 years. This isn't retail where you're thinking 10 or 15 years.
Right.
You're thinking 50 to 100 years. And so it's important that even though athletics might be pushing for, get it done quickly. I just want my space. I don't care what it looks like. I just have to get that court in or that indoor practice facility in. However, you have to have that responsibility for the campus. It's a long-term building. It's not for any one coach. It's not for any one team. It's something that's going to be there for a long time, and it has to pass the test of time.
Yeah. As the person that you hand the keys over to those buildings, that's a pretty big deal, because
that means a lot.
The facilities that were built maybe a little bit quicker that I've had experience with are not the easiest to operate comparatively.
I've seen some of those, Maury.
No, it's been.
They must not have been thinking about that, 50 years ago, because the older buildings also are tough.
Yeah. And athletics is guilty because they need it quickly. I mean, it's part of the nature of what's happening.
Right.
You might get a donor that says, do it now. You might get a coach that's, you're trying to hire a coach or whatever it may be. You're reacting, and so a lot of times it's a very reactive solution, and it might be just add on here, add on there, and grow just organically, without taking a step back and thinking about the big picture and the implications long term.
And it's funny because how you and I know each other is very much through being involved with trying to combat that issue through master planning. Because as a person that lived through kind of a more loose sense of how we're going to go from one thing to another, and then have a idea of, okay, these are the steps that we're going to take. it much more easily allows for you to, one, know where you're going, like how to plan stuff, but also I think provides a better quality of building because you kind of have a roadmap about where you're going. And that's something that you're kind of known for in the world of that's how you get people to where they need to be. Why did you look at planning as such a part of your career and then tying that with athletics?
Yeah, I think it's so super important to do, to really, again, sort of take a step back, look master plan wise, so you're strategic about growth. And it, you don't want to do something that in 10 years you're like, why did we do that? Now we can't do X.
Right.
And ideally, you're thinking about it comprehensively. What are the relationships of the buildings? At Syracuse, we talked about the one team theme,
right,
and having everybody come together. And so what are those themes and how do you reinforce those with facilities? And if you do a cheap and quick building, when you go to renovate or change, you realize you have garbage and you don't, and now you're throwing it away.
You end up ripping it down.
Yeah.
I've seen that firsthand.
Yeah. And with the sustainability movement that we're all well aware of now, there's no better sustainability than adaptive reuse.
Right.
Rather than tear down. So if something is built well, you can find another use for it, and you can add on to it potentially. But if it's not built well, now you're starting to throw things away.
And that's something interesting that I've seen a lot of is like repurposing. How can you leverage that, and also it allows some of your sports that might not always get the resources to have opportunity because you're going in and refreshing those spaces and being able to turn them over because they're quality to other sports that might not necessarily draw that financial revenue from donors. Now you're not wasting that space, and you can really leverage it really well. And it's something that I didn't really understand until going through a master planning process with you all and looking at, how can you really leverage this and how to be kind of the best steward of the space that you have.
Maury,
thinking about
you're very good at that, Maury, to repurpose space, let me tell you.
A lot of reuse of space.
Yeah, very creative, Maury.
Very creative. We are in every nook and cranny of these buildings up here.
Chris has seen it.
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah, and you struggle with things like not enough ceiling height,
right?
And things that are strange geometries, and how do you adapt that? It's not simple.
Yeah. Well, this is awesome. So Jen's gonna do the last question, and we'll go from there.
Our favorite one. So, what do you know now, Chris, that you wish you knew then? So, what do you know now at this point in your career that you wish you knew when you first started?
That's an interesting question. My career's kind of evolved toward my interests, because I do feel like, and I think this is true in any profession, that if you have a real interest and a passion in what you're doing, you'll do it more and you'll enjoy it more.
Yeah.
So I guess the thing I would say is I wish I had recognized sooner that there was a specialty there. And I don't know that I'd be in any different place than I am now, but I would have jumped in sooner and realized, I say sooner, I've been in it for a while now, but I do think that, I spent years doing other building types, and maybe that was more of a training ground, and then all of a sudden I appreciated the sport design. But I guess that's about the only thing I could think of that I would do a little differently.
So for those people out there listening, definitely the students, how do they connect with getting into what you do, whether it's through your company at Sasaki or other companies? What would be your recommendations for them to connect with the world of athletics and architecture?
Yeah, there are definitely firms that are in the space a lot more than others. We're one. There are others that many people know that are out there that are specializing in that. There are differences among those firms. Some are more focused on design and might have a little higher threshold of projects that they'll undertake. Others might be more about, just sort of providing service. So it's, that's kind of the spectrum in architecture. It's more service-oriented firms and more design-oriented firms. But if you're interested in sport design, It's not hard to find the firms that are the most popular ones. And I think if you show that interest and have the appropriate education and
Yeah.
interest in architecture, that you bring an extra value to that type of firm. Because I know when we're recruiting, we do more than just sport facilities.
Yeah.
But when I know that we need someone to support that aspect of our practice, if I can find someone that has an interest in that, that's again an added value, because I know they're going to bring that passion and a little more insight. We have employees that are former Division I athletes,
Yeah.
and so they bring that perspective. So that's helpful.
Is that something that they should be doing when they're doing projects or focusing and they have a choice about, I want to try and do some, design work? Should they be focusing on trying to understand that, or is it more general and it's better when you get to the firm to actually start, working within that space?
Yeah, I think it probably is more general in the beginning, because you're learning about how to design and how to put a building together, and the whole practice. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And you can do that with any building type. My career started, I was doing a lot of public schools.
Yeah.
And it was a really good training ground, because public construction is pretty rigorous.
Right.
And so, you learn how buildings go together, and you learn about the bidding process and how that all happens, and contractually and so forth. So, I do think it's a lot about learning the profession and then applying, your sort of interest level to it.
Well, that's awesome. Well,
That's cool.
Chris, thank you so much for your time. It was awesome to hear your perspective and to learn about something that really connects to the world of athletics. And definitely we'll keep following all the projects that you're doing. It's exciting to see the different things that come out. And we will hopefully see everybody on the next podcast. Please check us out on AthPod and Ath Career Pod. And we will see you next time.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
If you like the 5 Tips and Tricks podcast, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. You can rate and review us, including questions that may be answered on future episodes. The 5 Tips and Tricks podcast for careers in athletics is part of Athletic Career Consulting. Check us out at www.athcareer.com. Don't forget to follow and like us on your top social media platforms.